The Big Sell Illuminati, where some of the best in the business discuss what's worked, what's working, and what's failed in selling big sales. Our panel of experts includes Clarity Seeker, a black belt of brands, our snarky marketer, Monique de Maio. CEO to CEO selling is his game. Fortune 500 in his lane. The Lex Luthor of the close, Mark Kennedy. The effective executive, a force on the boards, a buyer on fire, Tiffany Olson. David versus Goliath selling, the prince of process, Sun Tzu of big sales strategy, Tom Searcy. And that's your panel. Now it's time to talk about big sales.
Welcome to the Big Sale Illuminati. We are here with our usual panel. We've got the snarky marketer, Monique, and we also have Mark Kennedy, the Lex Luthor of the close, and our buyer on fire, Tiffany Olson. I am Tom Searcy, sensei of sales strategy. So glad that we're all here. Today we're going to talk about sales narrative, sales storytelling as a part of how to control the conversation, shape a discussion, and move people to a new way of considering what you're offering as a product or a service to them. And in doing that, you kind of control the entire perspective. That's why we call it the narrative. And I asked Mark if he would kick us off and take us through some of this, because he is a consummate storyteller, and a lot of what he does inside of the things he does in the business has a lot of its elements starting in story.
Let's face it, Tom. The real reason I'm narrating today is ratings are plummeting, and we're throwing a Hail Mary. This is the Shark Tank episode of the BSI podcast. That's what this is. We're jumping a Shark Tank today, for those of you of age that understand what that means. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of graduate level tools today for controlling a sales narrative. One is called we just call it the Zuora deck, which is also the baseline deck upon which the original pitch was done for Salesforce.com, and then basically how that flows and what's important about it. And the second tool we've got is a tool that we use called the Authority Arc, and I'm going to let Tom explain a little bit about that in the future, because I think he knows a little bit about it. But first, I want to start with this concept of this Zuora story deck, and it's really a 5-step dance. The Zuora model begins with an opening, and the idea and the strategy behind controlling the narrative is most traditional sales conversations are all about helping our prospects solve a problem, address an issue, achieve an outcome in a business. And the concept of talking about a problem with a prospect, especially a senior executive, is a challenging one, because those people are problem solvers. They're not problem identifiers. And the tricky part is, how do you ally yourself with them without alienating them? That's the fine dance that most clumsy salespeople engage in, is they wind up alienating and establishing boundaries for arguments with their prospect, as opposed to allying with those partners through the process. So what I think is brilliant about this Zuora model we talk about is the first step that frames the whole conversation is naming a big relevant change in the world. So something has happened in their world that is also happened in your world, and that brings you with them and brings them along beside you. So a big relevant change in the world. So in my business, one of the things that we kind of go through is we go through and talk about the big relevant change in the world that's happened for marketers is in 2007, something cataclysmic happened. Two things cataclysmic happened that changes the way audience engagement has happened ever since and forevermore in the future. And that is, number one, the release of Netflix as a streaming service. So the very first streaming service for asynchronous television. So audiences just went, we went from synchronous television to asynchronous television like that. And the second thing is the advent of the iPhone. Those two things. iPhone 1 was released in 2007, the original streaming service. Now you have a multi-core processor connected to a high-speed data network, connected to cloud computing. So every possible amount of information is now in the hands of a consumer. Brands have gone from being in control of the brand narrative 80% of the time to being in control of the narrative 20% of the time in the purchase process. So that's a big relevant change that we use as an example as we kind of open and give this conversation. And for a marketer who's really struggling with, how do I get to those audiences and those core subsegments of my audiences that I really need to speak to, this change has become huge. The second step is there's a concept of there'll be winners and losers. So any big change in the world begins to set forth a series of trajectories and outcomes for important industries and companies and individuals. And it's important to demonstrate along the way that given this change, those organizations that can adapt to the empowered and connected consumer are going to be organizations that win. We use some examples like over the course of the last 20 years, 40% of the S&P 500 are no longer independent business companies or in business. The turnover that happens macroeconomically affects everyone and it pulls people in. So you've set your prospect up. The narrative that you're building is here's a problem that we're all facing together, and the implication of not acting is high. The implication of not acting also takes on the psychological condition of loss aversion, right? So loss aversion is more powerful than greed. The third of the steps as we hit through this model is called tease the promised land. So your offering by definition is addressed to serve and help this person solve this significant issue that's happened in the world. And there is a promised land, but that promised land is a challenging place to get to. And in order to do that, you hit the fourth step, which is you talk about the things and functions and features of your product are magic gifts that help enable that person to overcome the obstacles to get to the promised land. So in this case, it's here's how, here's where people are from an audience engagement perspective. This is how this solution works. Here's how we can find those new digitally empowered consumers. And here's what they're really looking for. That's really important. And then the last one is a very basic sales step, which is presenting evidence that your organization can achieve with organizations that are similar or more challenging than your prospect. This is the classic referrals. This is your case studies. These are your client testimonials. So the 5 steps, again, to recap, is big relevant change in the world, show that there'll be winners and losers, tease the promised land, introduce features as magic gifts, and present evidence. So we've kind of hit through that. I guess what I want to do is kick this around. So I guess kind of as a jump ball for, let's say, Tiffany, how does the Zuora model compare to either how you've sold in the past or how you've been sold to?
So I'll start with how I've been sold to. So as an executive buyer, I have a very, very short attention span. So if in the first 60 seconds you cannot get to why do I care, I stop listening. I need one message that I can remember because I can't remember a lot of things, but if I can remember one thing and get it in that first 60 seconds, then you've got me. If you don't, I've tuned out. I'm worried about the next problem. I'm going to the next thing. The other thing that I will say is that if there is a time for the meeting, so let's say that the meeting is 10 minutes, then you've got to have this story in a very short period of time. So you need to prepare the story, I think, really 3 ways: elevator speech, 5-10 minutes, or 10 to 20 minutes, and then leaving time for questions and discussion. So that for me is really, really key, is why do I care? Because if I can't figure that out, or you can't tell me in that short opening, then you've lost me.
It makes complete sense. All of us have attention spans that are diminishing. And I think one of the things that Mark talked about, I really liked about in his platform piece, when he talked about Netflix and cell phones or smartphones, was that he immediately put you in a talk track that was relevant to you. You remembered when Netflix came in. You remembered when that was, and his statement very quickly after that pulled you into the path. So connects with you in a way that everybody has. By the time that we get to the very end of his discussion, he's got you in a completely different place. But he started out where you both were. And I like that. I think that it's critical to bring people along by meeting. When he said the idea between problem solvers and problem identifiers, part of the issue of problem solving or problem identification is to go to the place of your buyer and then bring them to your place. If you just show up and go, bang, whatever your assumptions are up till now are wrong, that's not as helpful in the sales process as it could be. He went to where you were, and then he took you to where he wanted to be. So I like that.
Tom, I think the other side of that argument, and one that we occasionally use, and you talk about a narrative. So the narrative we've designed and crafted is one that it's very inclusive. And to your point, it's empathetic of where that potential buyer is. There's another side of the story that we've developed and tested that didn't work as well, which is the provocative side, which is today, if you're a chief marketing officer today, there's a great chance 2006 in 2006 and beyond, before, you were some kind of brand manager. So you were managing some kind of brand. And the brand managers that were classically trained before 2007 were 100% paid first strategists. So how do I engage audiences? Direct line TV, and then the digital revolution. But it's very pay to interrupt. Those folks were not necessarily born natively digital, and that's offensive when you lean into them, because the Luddite argument for a marketer sends them off the roof. Every now and then, provocation like that really gets you going, but we tested both sides of it, and the inclusive side gets kicked ass over the other.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to be called stupid, right? Nobody wants to feel stupid.
A Luddite.
Right. I mean, like, hey, great, thanks. You're irrelevant. That's what I'm basically telling you between the lines. You're irrelevant. That never works well at cocktail parties either.
I think one of the things, Mark, that you talk about is that I've used before are those big scary facts. So if you can kind of get someone and grab their attention with something that's really potentially very, very scary for them and their business, I think that always works well. I have actually used this model myself in trying to sell really kind of a new vision, new culture for my organization. And starting with that kind of undeniable shift, because many times if you're talking further down in the organization, maybe people haven't really identified that yet or understand it yet. And then talking about why we can win by making this change, painting that vision, and then using examples. And there's always a ton of them of industries that didn't move or companies that didn't take that turn. But that takes at least 5 minutes when you're doing like that. And then you have to repeat it because, you guys know you have to hear something 7 times before you kind of make any type of a change or do something different. But I found it very effective in really being able to tell the story. But usually you do need a little bit of time to do that.
So, Mark, what we've done in the past is also shown the logos of those in their industries that have gone by the wayside because they have not identified, followed, or overcame their threat in their industry. So it's like when Converged Communications came in.
Tombstones.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That's a good way to put it. Right. So it's like these guys got it and these brands are thriving, and these guys didn't get it and they're dead. So which one do you want to be, kind of thing. So it plays into your structure.
Seriously, what do you got on the Zuora? What do you got on the Zuora model?
So I love this particular model, and we use it with our clients. We help our clients to tell these stories in similar ways. But I came up with a part of one that I think is going to help out one of my clients. Okay, and we start off with item number 1, which is the platform change, or what's been the significant change in the marketplace. And I think it's the split who accesses the internet to get what information. Okay, so back in the past, you owned your own data and you had an opportunity to control your access. All right. And there was a clear, clean attribution of what it was that you had, where you got it from, who you chose to click. You went to their website, you accessed their information. That's changed. The AI now owns all the data and they control your access. So what does that mean? Or who are the losers in the future? If you've lost the data and the access, for those people that sell uniqueness and the idea of expertise, they've just been commoditized. When you reach into AI, it doesn't give you the attribution of who it was or what is the level of best or how am I going to find it. You simply ask a query into it, and then at the back end, a whole bunch of information comes out. Now, part of that information could be yours, and part of the information could be mine, part of the information could be someone else. It's assembled that together with little to no qualified attribution. I did 3 client searches on queries that I thought were valid just in the last 2 days. And when we came out, those clients who are in the top 5 of their industries never showed up. Even when I asked them to force rank in who are the top 5 in their industry by revenue, I knew the answer didn't show up. All right. I asked, where would I find that information out? It didn't give me a listing of what particular articles or items or publications that it would get. Attribution will come, but in the moment right now, what it means is that expertise and uniqueness is commoditized, which means we're all back on an unfair, what's considered to be playing field. However, If you can control attribution and connection inside of the world of AI, you have the opportunity to elevate to a higher level of definition of expertise and uniqueness. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, it's query control. If you're able to shape the information that is in all of your systems to how it will relate to query control in the AI model, ChatGPT, bard.google.com, it will fundamentally give you a, let's just use for the sake of the math, 6-month to 12-month lead out there in the marketplace. So what you've done is that you've said, I'm going to shift by query result rather than SEO result.
That's what I was going to say. It's just a different way to maintain relevancy in your content and in your marketing and your outreach. That's it.
So you're right. That's whole part of the narrative, right? Is the change in how we do this. We go from the backwards to the forwards. Look, ChatGPT in January was a good idea. In what was it, February? It was 100 million downloads, if I got my dates right on that. But anyway, what's the peekaboo for the future? What does this mean? All right. If you have control of that and where it comes from and what it does, you now have ownership of brand in an expertise location. And that means that you control through natural language how people will find you. And you have a better way to go ahead and crack the code on the algorithms that are out there that are driving these kinds of AI searches. So crafting that as a general idea, as a narrative, 100% accuracy or 50% accuracy starts a conversation that says, you used to live like me in this other world. This is the world we're moving into. How do you regain control in that next world? Now, if I sit down with Monique or Mark or Tiffany and I ask you guys, hey, let's polish up this story, put this together, it'll be 5 times better. But the Zuora model really helps you frame out the way in which you can put that story together.
I think also what it does is that by using this framework, you really have to think about what that story is and get it very, very tight before you go in to see the customer. And that is the preparation that really makes a difference.
It's taken us literally months to get one that's tight. And I laugh a little bit because my chief revenue officer is continually, she's like, stop experimenting, give me an actual published finished product. I'm like, I'm working on it. This is like it's like a masterpiece here. But yeah, it is, you're right, Tiffany. The distilling the story and getting it right is, it's not something you're just going to sit down and bang out in 10 minutes.
Yeah, the other thing that I agree with you, that's the hardest part of our engagements too, is and aligning the sales messaging that you're going to use as a CRO with your marketing messaging, which is supporting your CRO and the sales teams and so on. And if you talk to a lot of marketers, they do their marketing messaging in a silo. And that's dangerous too, because if they don't create a story and a narrative that your salespeople can wrap their brain and their mouth around, it's not going to play, and it's just going to sound very disconnected. And then when the buyer is doing their research independently, and let's remember that in B2B, 60 to 70% of that decision is almost made by the time you even walk in the door in their minds. So you're pushing the boulder uphill as it is, then you're in big trouble, because then they go to your website and there's a different message and a different value prop and a different, like, it's not what you heard in the meeting. So you can't have that.
So continuity of all of it. No, I really like that story model. I wonder, Mark, you kind of laid one out. I threw mine out as it related to the shifting from Google access to AI access, and how do you possibly as a firm? Is there anybody else who's got one that comes to mind as one of those examples of a story?
So this was actually a situation that Tom helped me with. And it was one where there was definitely a shift in the industry. The customer knew it, so it wasn't any type of secret. But we really started with a scary fact, and that was having to do with the supply chain, how fragile it was, and the need to diversify, and really to avoid some of the issues that we all felt during COVID. But this was years before we ever even heard the word COVID. So it was about painting this vision, avoiding the scary fact, how you could be a winner And then actually what ended up occurring during the middle of this very large decision, so it was several months of working with the customer, was that they did have an issue with their current supply chain. So everything that we had been talking about actually came true. And so our prediction, the scary fact that we had started with going down, supply chain going down, happened. So we had our magic gifts. And then that's when we really were able to move that sales process a lot faster than even we had imagined.
You painted the future ahead of time, and then it came true. I mean, that is kind of the ultimate incredibility when you're a salesperson. Yeah.
Same thing happened in, I think, in technology and in technology product versus solution selling. And I think we had a convergence of in converged communications. We had a convergence. We used to be called telecom, right? Nobody calls it that anymore. But it was this a boatload of clients that didn't understand how to pivot their marketing and salespeople to selling solutions and services, and it was a very different animal than selling like phone systems or, you know, equipment that went into the office and you sold it to the telecom or the PBX manager or whatever. That was a huge shift. And it lasted for 10 years that these companies did not really understand how to deploy their salespeople with the right narratives to be able to go into a customer and paint the picture and have them understand that they were selling solutions that took care of that communication. So I thought that was the longest running stretch of pivots in the sales narrative space that I've ever experienced.
I've got a completely unfair question, and nobody may be able to answer it, and I'm not sure I can. But if you were to look at a 60-second TV ad right now, well, there are such things as TV channels now. It's hard to believe. But if you were to look at a 60-second window and someone was going to run exactly what we just talked about, what it used to be, why there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers, and then the idea of peekabooing the success of the future and all the rest. Is there an ad out there that shows that promise, that you just see enough of it inside of 60 seconds, that whereas instead of 7 times that are out there? Now there's an old one. There was a Super Bowl one 1,000,000 years ago, and that was Apple.
I was going to bring that one up. Absolutely. And we all remember it.
Yeah, the Apple was exact inside of 60 seconds. You understood that we were being treated by the marketplace, or specifically Microsoft, as drones, that we didn't have any control. And so I think of that one as an example of that, because it was so well done. It immediately told you where you fit in the world of the marketplace. So now I know that Mark tells one as it stands right now, as for the world in how it sees you and how it finds you, and what that does as far as your ability to be seen and to be found. I'm not trying to speak too much into his business, but enough to go ahead and say that that's the piece where, again, the idea of you holding control, that brand management idea, right? And then realizing that no, you don't have control of it. You could, but not doing the things that you're doing right now. Does a nice job of that particular kind of an arc overall. In our case, in our business, we talk an awful lot about the fact that the cost of sale is going up, and it will only go up for a variety of the particular contributions. And you really don't know what to do. You're just going to go digital and see if you can try and sell $1 million tractors or $1 billion tractors by the internet sale. Not so much so. So you're going to have to make a significant change from what you've done, and that involves the following items. And here's the folks that have done it, and that's why it works. My favorite is to start off with people that are near my age with the idea of the territorial sales rep, because that's what my dad was. And I can walk you all through the arc of, you remember when it was easy and you could look somebody in the eye and then they could just buy, and then after that we went off in golden jets forever. Why do I have to see all these other people?
As today's stand-in moderator for the podcast, I have to pick up on the arc you're dropping down on me as we kind of transition into the second piece of this show. So I think the Zuora model is structurally sound. I think it's something that a salesperson can use, adopt. I'm sure we'll post the link to the actual article itself that gives some of the behind the scenes pieces and thinking behind the different elements. But an incredible tool. Another tool we want to add and introduce to folks so that they can have in their back pocket is something near and dear to Tom called the authority arc. Do you want to? There's no reason I explain it to you. Why don't you kind of explain the model of the arc and what it does in terms of how it can be an asset in driving narrative, and then we'll kind of go around robin around how we've used or had it used on us.
Yeah, the authority arc is actually a conversational control model. It works from everywhere from the beginning of the messaging to the very end, because if you're going to wind up seeing 7 people over the course of a sales process, you're going to wind up having to go back to the same conversation. There's this assumption salespeople make is that all of your information has been passed on to the next person who's going to attend the next meeting, so we can just skip that and go to whatever step that we have that's going to get us to proposal. So the authority arc starts up. Every conversation starts with some level of data. All right, what is the information that we have? And that's what it is. It's the current state of your particular business. And then analysis means is simply that. What does now mean? So if I am out there and I've got, in let's just say Monique's world, the data right now says that Mr. Customer, Ms. Customer, you have 100,000 available people who meet your requirements. That's the data. That's what it is right now. The analysis says that outside of that, there are 30,000 who are reasonably qualified. So that's the data and the analysis. So the third piece of this is implications. And the implication says you're spending, and I'm making this up, Monique, but you're spending money to reach 100,000 people. The implications are you should be spending money to reach 30,000 people, the right 30,000 people. All right. So from that, you have the options, which is spend more to reach more. Okay. Or spend same to reach more. Spend same to reach less, which means per unit you get more benefit out of it. So I spend 100,000 people's worth of money to reach just the 30,000 that I want to sell. All right. So do nothing, do this, something else, or try and do it yourself. Try and look in and see if you can find the 30,000, et cetera. So those are your options. All right. So that's your implications. And I've just given the options. The implication, you're spending too much to get to too few. Options, I've just given you 3. So we're at data, analysis, implications, then options. And then we say, here's a recommendation. Leverage your money. Take the money you're spending on the 100,000, double down on the 30,000. All of them get X amount more, 3 times the attention and messaging than they would have gotten otherwise. That's a recommendation. And then the last one is choice. All right, is that they've made that choice, you've closed that deal. So I've walked through that. The interesting thing is it's evergreen. If you pitch a company and then you go back and talk to them a month later, you can run those same traps again. You may have new data, you may have new analysis, you may be selling and saying, this is what the future looks like. And they say, boy, I'd really like to understand a lot better about what you would do with that. You talked about these options, but I got a lot of people. I've got IT people and operations people and communications people, et cetera. They need more data and analysis as it relates to them. Fine. We're going to walk that set of traps all the way back through. But at the end of those traps, right, I am going through a logic piece of telling a story. And I revisit it, which then makes it repeated and more credible. So that's the authority arc. And oh, by the way, a piece of that will probably be in our show notes. And a recently published book, The Secret to Big Sales, has the authority arc in it. You can find it on Amazon.
God, I've lost complete control. Our first commercial, our shameless reference at the 31-minute mark.
This is the latest I've done it. Why? I don't understand why I'm not getting credit.
You are. So the authority arc, I've used it extensively. I've worked with Tom for a while. I probably have 10 years of it. It's become, I've kind of institutionalized it in the sales force that I've stood up for a couple reasons. Number one, it is an incredible way. We talk about the authority arc. What it really does is it confers authority upon the user. So as a salesperson, one of the things that you're always trying to be the prize, and having and being able to have executive level conversations, this covers the amount of optionality required to establish yourself as an authority. So hugely important in terms of having the command of the model, in terms of being able to run from the fact that you can show. I mean, ultimately, what you're really doing is you're helping someone make an emotional decision with logic, is really what you're doing with the authority arc. And it's brilliant, and it's designed that way. And that's not just pandering to Tom.
You're absolutely right. It takes the emotion out of some of the discussion. So I've had this model and used this model when it's a incredibly emotional discussion, and we've did internally. Everyone was upset. Nobody, really kind of understood what was going on. Look at the data, analyze the data, then come back with these options. And it does take that emotion out. I think the other thing that it does is it as you guys have said, it takes that sales person and really elevates them and elevates their expertise to the point of where if someone is providing me with that data, I want them with me the next time I've got to talk about this data and tell this story because they're the ones that have done that analysis. So I think it also helps not only with that credibility, but with getting in the next time and the next time and moving through the organization.
How does that model compare to how you usually sold to as the buyer on fire? Do you get that kind of treatment or not?
With really good people, yes. Otherwise, a lot of people come in unprepared. They have their story. They might be nervous. They're just going to talk about their thing. And, sometimes I even take pity on people because it's like, oh my gosh, they're so nervous. So I'll give them the time, but when they leave, it's like, okay, yeah, not again. Nope.
That's not a buyer on fire. That's like buyer on dying embers. I mean, if that's all it takes, I will become more pitiable. I just have to find somebody who pities me.
So, Monique, you're somebody who oozes authority. You ooze authority. How would you use this thing?
At the end of the day, all of these models have something very much in common, and that is more like the macro view of the world. And then you get down almost like to a funnel, if you will, to this micro implication. What does it mean for you, Mr. Customer? And how am I going to solve for your problem and remove some of your pain? Because I like to contextualize it like this. You're giving context to your content, and without context, nothing you're going to say is going to stick. Nothing you're going to say has relevancy until you anchor it to facts, figures, statistics, data, the world, what's going on, trends, the industry. All of that stuff has to give you context because otherwise you can't just show up, plop your briefcase down or your computer down and be like, so let's talk about my solution. It's not going to work. So, you can't give me a solution when you don't even know the problem. And oh, by the way, I'm not in the right mindset because I'm talking to the CEO that just had a pity party for 3 other salespeople that just walked out. So I got to settle you down, get you to contextualize why I am a solution provider that can actually solve for the pain. So this macro to micro view is what hangs to everything together. Like our messaging has, what is it? What's the problem statement? What's the value proposition? And then the 3 key messages that I want you to remember, because again, nobody can remember more than 3 things at a time. So, it's fast, cheap, and whatever. The point is, it's the same kind of process. Context, contextualize, build a story, understand how you connect the story to the customer's pain, and then solve for it.
Well, it's one of the things I like about the story piece is also stories travel better. So when you've got Mark's the Zuora story, right? That travels a little bit better between people because what he's doing is he's creating through that model. When I say he's creating this repeated kind of belief set that says from the past to the future and the points of concern along the way. So they travel better than just data, just provocative choices. They have a lifespan that's a little longer.
We have heroes, we have heroines, we've got, we have conflict, we have resolution.
And yours has a villain, right?
Well, the villain is what's happening in the industry that's causing them the pain. The villain is always like, you don't want to attach your customer to the villain. You want to make them the hero with you.
Yeah, it's hard to be a hero if there isn't a villain, which is a summary of Mark's point. And the villain is typically always external. It's either the market forces that are out there, competitors are out there, something that's going that if you don't anticipate the future, it will roll over you. But in any way, you're going to help them. To your point, Monique, you're going to help them be the hero against that challenge.
Tom, you've probably deployed the authority arc 100 times. What are some of the interesting applications you've seen of it?
Some of the things I found out about the authority arc is that you can't skip a step. So somebody says, all right, look, right now in the marketplace, there's 100 million people who just downloaded. It's the alternative to Twitter. All right. And so they just downloaded that. And because of that, what you need to do is to buy our service that will put up in all of those streams. It's going to wind up putting up your message in there. That's just a leap. You can't just say that's that. You haven't told me any implications. You can't tell me what the other competitors are going to be out in the marketplace. You can't tell me how they're going to control the algorithms. My IT person's going to come in here and say no, 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 no about why that all won't work. And so that's probably one of the examples when I've seen it not work. I've seen one on a streaming service recently where we went back to the authority arc, and it was two streaming services that were merging together. All right. And so the authority arc had to be told on both sides of the equation. So you had to use the data from each side and walk them up data analysis, and then the implications had to come together. So the salesperson, it was actually the sales professional and the sales professional team were working two sides. One was one side of the streaming service, the other side of the streaming service, and they brought them together in the authority arc so that by the time they got to the implication side, each side saw the need to buy the services. Even though they were separated in the past, now they need to buy it together. So 1 + 1 = 3, and then they could take it to the options, recommendations, and choice. So that's probably one of my favorite ones recently. I had a similar one with the two airlines that were merging, but that was just an interesting thing where you had the authority arc being told in parallel at a future point of meeting.
So really, Tom, from the negative of that, when it doesn't work, it's because people have skipped a step. They haven't built up that credibility or
You bring up another great point, and that is that they don't confirm the agreement to the data before they move to the analysis, or they don't confirm the analysis. So they go, I'm going to tell the whole story: data, analysis, implications, options, recommendations, instead of saying, wait a minute, all right, this is the data that we have. Can we agree that that data is accurate, relevant, worthy of going forward? Okay, right now, well, let's talk about the analysis of what that means. And then you have to get confirmation of that, because you're just building on sand if you haven't gotten agreement before. So each step has to have agreement along the way before you go to the next step. There's a huge pitch recently. Let's just say there's a guy named Kyle. Just as
our favorite guy.
So that particular person came in and did the authority arc on his last pitch, and it was to a very, very large financial services integrated group. And he came in and he got all the way to recommendations. By the way, that was a slippery slope. He got there without any interruption, like a customer saying anything or getting asked a question or whatever, and got all the way to that and said, would you like to go ahead and sign up for a pilot? And so there was no confirmation moments along the way or interaction with the customer. A brilliant presentation without having to be bothered by talking to a customer and asking them questions.
Yeah, that's not good. I mean, if you don't get the nod throughout, you have to gain alignment and agreement before you go to the next step. I mean, that's what you're saying in the authority arc, but isn't that kind of common sense? Otherwise it's like it's a monologue.
If it was a common sense, I wouldn't have a business. Do you remember? I don't know if I told this joke. The old joke where the CEO sends one of his people off to, a 3-day conference. The guy comes back and he says, "Well, what did you think of the conference?" He goes, "It was pretty good. I mean, but for the most part, it's just common sense." And the CEO says, "Great, we're sending everybody."
Kyle, did he get smacked around and sent back to school?
Let's just say a salesperson named Kyle was nursery school. He was sent back, unfortunately, down to another layer to then have to, meekly crawl his way back up to an actual decision maker.
See the other podcast on why and how you sell pilots and when you don't.
Right. The other side, yeah. What he was looking for was a buyer who had pity on him. That's
there you go.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Big Sale Illuminati, and for myself and for the panel. We are glad. If you like, and it's going to say it here in a minute. You know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to like and subscribe and tell all of your friends. And we'd like to continue to expand this. And so we're grateful for you, everybody. And we'll talk to you in the next episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Big Sell Illuminati podcast. If you like this episode, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Until our next episode, best wishes on your big sales.